Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
I had presided over countless trials, but the moment Magnus Griffin walked into my courtroom, something inside me shifted. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. His tall frame, his defiant posture, the way his eyes seemed to take in every corner of the room with a cold, calculating glance. It was unsettling, but it wasn't just his demeanor that had my attention. No, it was the gleam of a silver chain around his neck, an amulet I had given to my son 2 decades ago. I felt my breath catch, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. That amulet, with its worn edges and a small, engraved symbol, a gift I had given to a 1-year-old child who disappeared from my life forever. How could this man, this criminal, be wearing it? My thoughts spiraled as the prosecutor began laying out the charges against him: theft, conspiracy, his involvement in a string of high-profile robberies. I barely heard a word of it. Instead, my gaze locked on the small, crescent-shaped birthmark peeking out from beneath his dark hair as he shifted in his seat. My mind froze. I knew that mark. My son had been born with it, a small, distinct crescent on his forehead, 20 years ago. But that was impossible. I had lost him. There was no way. The room seemed to close in on me. I gripped the edge of my bench, trying to steady myself. The prosecutor's voice became a distant murmur, the world around me blurring. My head spun, and then everything went dark. Judge Wood. A voice cut through the fog in my mind, and I opened my eyes to see a bailiff kneeling next to me. "Are you all right?" I blinked, struggling to regain my composure. Yes, I'm fine," I whispered, though my hands trembled as I pushed myself upright. The courtroom had fallen silent, all eyes on me, but it was his eyes, Magnus's eyes, that burned into me, a question behind them, as if he sensed something too. "Let's take a recess," I croaked, my voice barely steady. I needed air. I needed time to think. The courtroom emptied, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the amulet, at the birthmark. How could this be? Could Magnus Griffin, this criminal, really be my lost son? Before I could stop myself, I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Dr. Miller, it's Kathleen Wood. I need a favor. A private DNA test," discreetly. I hung up, my heart racing. If this man was who I feared, who I hoped he might be, then my life was about to change forever. Days after the hearing, I found myself pacing in my office, the sound of my heels clicking against the cold, marble floor. My mind was racing, torn between duty and emotion. The results of the genetic test were supposed to arrive today, and every second felt like an eternity. Magnus Griffin's trial had been postponed, again, under my orders. Each delay only made the whispers in the courthouse grow louder, but I didn't care. Not about the case, not about the legal world I had spent decades building. All I cared about was the truth. A soft knock at the door startled me. "Judge Wood." Dr. Miller's voice was calm, but the moment our eyes met, I knew he had the results. He handed me the sealed envelope, his gaze full of sympathy. "You should sit down before you open it." I sat slowly, my fingers trembling as they tore at the paper. The world outside seemed to fade as I scanned the lines of text. And there it was, cold and undeniable, 99.9% match. Parent-child relationship confirmed. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me: relief, fear, joy, and guilt all at once. The boy I had lost, the son I thought I would never see again, had been in front of me this entire time. But the boy I had lost wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man who stood accused of serious crimes. Dr. Miller spoke softly, pulling me from my thoughts. "Kathleen, what are you going to do?" I couldn't meet his gaze. I don't know. I spent years searching for him, praying that he was alive. And now I find him in the worst possible way. Dr. Miller placed a hand on my desk, his tone gentle. He may not remember you, but that doesn't change who he is. You need to talk to him." I nodded slowly, knowing he was right. But how could I face Magnus after everything? How could I tell him that the woman who had been judging his case, the one who held his fate in her hands, was the mother he never knew? Later that afternoon, I arranged for Magnus to be brought to my chambers under the pretense of discussing the trial. When he entered, his expression was as hard as ever, his guard up. "What's this about, Judge Wood?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "There's something I need to tell you, Magnus," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something that will change everything." He frowned, crossing his arms. "What, another delay? Or are you finally going to convict me?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "No, it's not about that." I met his gaze, willing him to see the truth in my eyes. "It's about your past, about who you really are." Magnus scoffed, turning to leave. "I don't have time for this." "Wait," I called out, my voice breaking. "You're my son, Magnus. You were taken from me 20 years ago. I've been looking for you ever since." He froze mid-step, his back still to me. For a long, agonizing moment, he didn't say anything. When he finally turned to face me, his eyes were filled with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "What are you talking about?" "My parents. They raised me. I don't know you." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I know it's hard to believe, but the DNA test confirmed it. You were taken from me when you were a baby. The amulet you wear, I gave that to you." Magnus stared at me, his expression unreadable. "I don't remember any of that." The silence between us was thick with unspoken words, and I realized that no matter what the test said, the truth would take time to sink in, for both of us. The courtroom was stifling with tension, though Kathleen Wood's face betrayed nothing. Her mind was racing as she reviewed the documents before her, her hands trembling slightly under the desk. Across the room, Magnus sat quietly, the weight of his future pressing down on him. The chains around his wrists clinked every time he shifted in his seat, a harsh reminder of what was at stake. Kathleen had spent sleepless nights agonizing over this decision. She had uncovered the truth. Magnus was indeed her lost son. The DNA test had confirmed it, but the cold comfort of science did little to ease the conflict in her heart. How could she reconcile the boy she had once lost, the son she had dreamed of for 2 decades, with the man accused of a crime so severe that it threatened to bury his future forever? Magnus caught her gaze. His eyes, so similar to her own, were filled with regret, but also a desperate hope. He wasn't the hardened criminal he pretended to be. She knew it. But the law didn't operate on feelings. The evidence against him was solid. The jury had been convinced, and yet, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the defense lawyer finished his argument. The air was thick with the knowledge that this moment could define both their lives forever. Kathleen stood, clearing her throat. "The court will take a brief recess," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. She needed a moment, just a moment, to breathe, to think about what she was about to do. In the private chambers, Kathleen found herself alone, leaning against the cold wall. The decision she was about to make went against every principle she had upheld throughout her career. But Magnus was her son. Could she really let him suffer in prison for a crime he didn't fully commit? The door creaked open behind her. It was Magnus' defense attorney, an old colleague of hers, Jacob Reed. "Kathleen," Jacob started, his voice low and urgent. "We both know he's guilty by the evidence, but you've seen something I haven't. What's going on?" Kathleen turned to face him, her face tight with emotion. "I've seen enough to know that sending him to prison will destroy him. He's not the criminal they think he is. He's been misled." Jacob raised an eyebrow, sensing the conflict but not yet understanding. "Misled or not, the jury won't be lenient. If you've got an ace up your sleeve, now's the time to play it." Kathleen felt the weight of his words sink into her chest. She nodded slowly, whispering more to herself than to Jacob. I can't let him pay for this. Not my son. Jacob froze, his eyes widening with sudden understanding. Your son, he echoed in disbelief. He let out a breath and shook his head. Kathleen, this is dangerous. You could lose everything. She met his gaze, her voice firmer now. I know what I'm risking, but he's my son. I can't abandon him now. Minutes later, Kathleen returned to the courtroom, her heart pounding with the finality of her decision. As she cleared her throat, the room fell silent. After reviewing the evidence and taking into account the circumstances surrounding the crime, Kathleen began, her voice steady but betraying a slight tremor. The court finds the defendant, Magnus Griffin, not guilty. A collective gasp filled the room. Magnus's eyes shot to his mother, disbelief and relief warring in his expression. How could this be happening? He had prepared himself for the worst, but now, he was free. Kathleen's gaze shifted briefly to her son, her expression unreadable, before turning back to the court. However, she continued, her tone now firm and authoritative. The court finds Rafael Cruz, Magnus Griffin's accomplice, guilty of the charges brought against him. Rafael didn't flinch. He had known this was coming. As the bailiffs moved toward him, his lips curled into a thin smile. He leaned over to Magnus and muttered, "Looks like you're the lucky one, Griffin. Remember, you owe me." Magnus's throat tightened. He wanted to respond, to thank Rafael or apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he watched as Rafael was led away in handcuffs, his partner taking the fall for the crime that they both had committed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Court is adjourned," Kathleen announced, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. Magnus remained seated as the courtroom slowly emptied. His mind swirled with conflicting emotions, gratitude, guilt, and the overwhelming reality of what had just transpired. He was free, but at what cost? Magnus sat across from Kathleen in her office, the silence between them thick and charged with unspoken words. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. It had been hours since the trial ended, hours since she had made the choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. But there was no going back now. Kathleen's fingers traced the edge of her desk, trying to steady herself. She looked at Magnus, her son, and yet still a stranger in so many ways. His expression was unreadable, a mix of guilt, gratitude, and confusion. She knew he had questions, but she wasn't sure she had the answers. "I didn't expect this," Magnus finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if he still couldn't quite believe what had happened in the courtroom. Kathleen looked at him, her eyes soft but resolute. "I didn't either," she admitted, "but I couldn't let you be lost to me again. Not after everything." Magnus shifted in his seat, rubbing his hands together nervously. "You saved me, but why? After all I've done, after the life I've lived, why take such a risk?" Kathleen leaned forward, her voice firm yet filled with emotion. "Because you're my son. I lost you once, and I won't lose you again. I believe in you, Magnus. You're not beyond saving." Magnus lowered his gaze, a deep frown creasing his forehead. "I don't deserve it," he muttered. "I've done things you don't even know about." Kathleen's heart ached at his words, but she wouldn't let him spiral into guilt. "You made mistakes, yes, but that doesn't mean you can't change. What matters is what you do from here on out." Magnus looked up at her, something shifting in his eyes. He took a deep breath, as if trying to gather the strength to speak. I don't want to let you down again," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll make things right, I swear it." Kathleen nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That's all I ask," she said softly, "but it won't be easy. You have to rebuild, earn your place in this world, and leave behind the life you've known." Magnus swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. I'll do it, he vowed. No more crime, no more running. I'll make something of myself. I owe you that much. Kathleen reached across the desk, placing her hand gently over his. You don't owe me anything, Magnus. You owe it to yourself to be better, to live the life you were meant to have. For the first time since the trial, Magnus smiled, a small tentative smile, but real nonetheless. I'll try, he promised. I won't let you down. Kathleen squeezed his hand, her heart swelling with both hope and fear. She had taken the biggest risk of her life to protect him, but now it was up to Magnus to keep his vow. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, she felt like there was a chance for redemption, for both of them. As Magnus stood to leave, he hesitated by the door. Thank you for believing in me, he said quietly before slipping out, leaving Kathleen alone with the weight of their shared future. She sat back, exhaling slowly. The vow had been made. Now, only time would tell if Magnus could keep it. The morning light filtered through the window, painting the room in a soft golden glow. Magnus stood by the door, staring out at the bustling city below. It had been months since the trial, months since his life had been turned upside down by the revelation of who he really was. And now, as he prepared to take his first steps into a new chapter, the weight of everything he had been through pressed on his shoulders. Behind him, Kathleen entered the room quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She placed one on the table near Magnus and took a seat, watching him with a mix of concern and pride. Are you ready? She asked gently, her voice breaking the silence. Magnus turned to face her, his jaw tight. Ready as I'll ever be, he replied, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. He glanced at the stack of university papers on the table, his new path to redemption. You've worked hard for this, Kathleen said, taking a sip of her coffee. You're about to start fresh. Not many people get that chance. Magnus nodded but didn't sit down. His hands fidgeted, a sign that his nerves were getting the better of him. I know, he said, almost whispering. It's just, I've spent so long running, making the wrong choices. It feels strange. Kathleen smiled softly, understanding the gravity of his emotions. Change is never easy, Magnus. But this time, you're not alone. You have me, and you have a future you've earned. Magnus finally sat, resting his elbows on the table. I just don't want to mess up again, he admitted. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not cut out for this new life? Kathleen reached across the table and gently touched his hand. You're not the same person you were before. You've already proven that you're stronger than your past. It won't be easy, but every step forward counts. I believe in you. Magnus looked into his mother's eyes, seeing the unwavering faith she had in him. It was still surreal. This relationship, this bond that had only recently formed. He'd been alone for so long, but now, there was someone who believed in his potential, someone who saw beyond his mistakes. He took a deep breath and nodded. All right, one step at a time. Kathleen smiled, warmth flooding her expression. That's all you need to do. One step at a time. The sound of the clock ticking filled the room as they sat together in silence. Finally, Magnus stood, picking up his bag and the papers he would need for his first day at university. I'll see you tonight, he said, giving Kathleen a small but sincere smile before heading for the door. Good luck, Kathleen called after him, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and hope. As the door closed behind him, Kathleen exhaled, her gaze lingering on the place where her son had stood. This was truly the beginning of something new, for both of them.